Today's video is sponsored by me! Because if you didn't know, I'm bringing out a book called On Writing and World Building, and today I will be revealing to you the magnificent, the gorgeous, the fantastic cover done by artist Chris Drake, and it looks like this. Seriously, it is absolutely incredible. It is everything that I have ever wanted, and it perfectly encapsulates the tone and style of my writing, I feel. It's got just this amazing mix of blues and purples and reds. This side represents on writing, while this side represents on world building. Following onto the back where we have all of the topics listed. Those are every single on writing and world building script that I have produced so far, plus several thousand words exclusive content on how I plan a novel, as well as how I know whether or not a story will work, generally before I even write the first chapter, plus dozens of side stories and thoughts that never really made it into the video itself. Just to give you a close-up on like the amazing detail, like look, that's like a little wizard dude, and then we got like a claw candle and magic scrolls and a quill and a misty night behind the title. It's just amazing. I love it so much. It's incredible. This was made to compile all of my work into a single, easy to read and easy to reference book so that you don't have to go scrolling through all the videos to find that one point or one sentence or one thing that I discussed about. Instead, you can just navigate to it with the contents page. And now I need you to do two things. Firstly, the release date is May 30th, but if you have found my On Writing and World Building series helpful to your writing and your book, then you can actually pre-order the Kindle version now down at the link in the comments and the description below for just $5. This will give you the whole book, just an ebook version, and I'm sorry, but there aren't paperback pre-orders because Amazon doesn't do that. Number two, if you have any questions at all about this book or its release or anything else, then please leave them down below in the comments. Patrons get their questions prioritized. Of course, I will be doing Q&A about it at some point in the coming weeks. Thank you to all of you patrons who have already pre-ordered, and thank you to every single one of you who are considering pre-ordering now. It really does mean the world. Paperback copies will be available May 30th. Mark it down, Supreme Leader Mishka commands you. Also follow me on Instagram, cause hashtag connect with the youths. Okay, I've been talking for a while. Onto the video. It's just so pretty. Civil wars have some awesome names like The Anarchy,
The Glendois Rising,
which needs to be a book title, and
The Warlord Era.
How cool is that? It's no surprise that you want to write about them. Civil wars can range from small-scale skirmishes to the widespread systematic fracturing of a state into a dozen different factions, and to discuss how they might fit into your story, we're going to break it down into 7 parts. Civil war tension, national identity, the most important type of civil war tension, 3 realistic factors in causing civil war, character motivation, gaining and losing, communicating instability in the first act, violence and character motivation, and the tragedy of the setting. Bit of a mouthful, all of those topics, but I really didn't know how to phrase them otherwise. So, part 1, civil war tension, national identity. Now, this might come as a surprise, but World War I was kind of not very good. In the decades afterward, a whole lot of young men went home and started writing about how just very not good it was, with famous books like All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque emerging. And if large-scale modern warfare sparked the war is miserable genre, then Civil War started the brother versus brother genre, with stories like Walt Whitman's Two Brothers, One North, One South, detailing how two brothers fought on opposite sides during the American Civil War, and what that does to a brotherly relationship. This is usually what characterizes the major differences between a war novel and a Civil War novel. A writer can always position characters on opposing sides, but the setting of a civil war specifically gives a unique external focus in exploring how different groups of people believe how the same country and the same people should be. For example, John Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World recounts the turmoil in the early 20th century Russia as more an ideological battle of national identity, of the place of monarchy, rights, and political freedoms in Russia, more than anything else. This is the question in Captain America Civil War.
We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game. If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless, we're no better than the bad guys.
If someone dies on your watch, you don't give up. We are for not taking responsibility for our actions. This document just shifts the blame.
If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose.
These are two fundamentally different interpretations of what it means to be an Avenger, but also what it means to be an American. Is personal responsibility accepting limitation for past wrongs, or is it ensuring that only you can be pointed to for blame? Now, you might side with Cap, or you might be wrong. The scope of the Civil War setup can more easily and explicitly ask what that national identity is, what it means, and where the flaws are and where the strengths are. More easily than facing an external threat like Thanos allows, with the war acting as a thematic proxy. Part 2. The most important type of Civil War tension. The Civil War story invites another specific kind of conflict where the perspective characters feel pulled to two or more sides of the conflict. This is something that Legend of Korra Season 2 actually did kind of well, and yes, before you yell at me, and to my shock, I am using Season 2 as an example of interesting writing. Korra is torn between her allegiance to the South and her family and her allegiance to the world, unifying the two tribes and bringing spiritual harmony as the Avatar. This conflict plays out for half the season, with Korra even threatening to take a judge's life as she struggles with to whom her allegiance belongs.
You take their lives and I'll take yours.
Korra, calm down.
This is before the magic carpets arrive. I mean, what the... I mean, the conflict plays out and Korra has to resolve which side she falls on and where her loyalties lie. That is a large part of the tension in the story. And unlike that external, broader, more ideological and abstract conflict of national identity like in Captain America Civil War or John Reed's book, this is a personal and internal conflict over your allegiance, your relationships, your interpersonal conflicts, and your individual values. In a normal war, the protagonists don't usually get to pick a side, or the side they do pick is a pretty easy choice. We don't see Samwise Gamgee going, "Hey, Mr. Frodo, Sauron might have a point." There aren't usually the complicating factors of friends and family, at least not to the degree that a civil war usually does. There's no single legitimate state to decide what the official position is, because the state is at war, there are competing factions. In Legend of Korra, her uncle is the aggressor, her father is the exiled criminal chief of the South, and her friends are caught up attempting to stop third-party war profiteering. Consider actually mapping out your characters and their relationships, as well as how they change throughout the story. This will give you a grounded and clear source of conflict that feels a lot more personal than these abstract ideas will. The reason that I say that this is the most important type of tension in Civil War stories is that though the war setting might move the events of the plot, the relationships in this web of characters you have will always be the primary medium of conflict in the story. It's what gives emotional weight to what happens. Even if there is a philosophical backbone to the story, the reader will become invested through how characters feel betrayed, confused, or hatred towards those that side against them or with them, forcing them to work with people that they hate or forcing them to fight against people that they love. They might begin as friends, acquaintances, or rivals and end up as something else as the reader comes to understand the characters deeply. You can't spend the whole time abstractly preaching about how it's anti-American to be a communist. Part 3. 3 realistic factors in causing civil war. Now, while this isn't a world-building video, it is important to consider how the realistic causes of civil wars play into this web of characters that we've been talking about, that creates this primary source of tension in your Civil War story. Now, I'm sure you expected this at some point, but history is complicated! And civil wars are no exception. They have a myriad of causes, and simplifying them to any one thing would be reductionist. So I encourage you to read the paper that I've linked down below, Dynamics and Logics of Civil War, which gives the question the many more thousands of words that it deserves. However, we will discuss 3 important factors that they identify relevant to the narrative in particular: grievance, stability, and violence. Firstly, grievance. In 2004, Collier and Hoffler summarized that ideological grievances are immaterial because they are constants in civil war. According to this microeconomic framework, civil wars can be expected to break out where opportunity costs of fighting are low because of poverty, and where wartime gains stemming from looting natural resources lead to enrichment. Essentially, they're saying that grievance motivations, like political inequality or political injustices with a principled belief in getting rid of the billionaires with a democratic guillotine to the neck, are less important causes than a socio-political environment that is A, low risk, and B, high returns for starting a civil war. That you'll get a lot out of it and you haven't got much to lose. If that's the case, an ideology will spring up and give it some framing, give it some momentum. We do actually see this in the 1918 to 1922 Russian Civil War. While there were ideologies at play, capitalism, monarchism, and of course, communism, there was a lot to be gained economically and politically for the monarchist and capitalist classes, and not a lot to lose for the working class, because if they did nothing, then they would lose their newfound influence anyway. To note though, grievance does play a role. To pretend that Lenin's passionate belief in working class rights played no role would be fallacious. But grievances can be remedied in a stable state with institutions to address them, leading on to our next point. Secondly, instability. Statistically, civil wars break out more often in states that are already unstable, following on from that low-risk, high-returns model. The First Roman Civil War is a clear example of this, with the dispossessed poor flooding into Rome, leading to conflicts between the populares, like Gaius Marius, and the optimates, like Sulla. Tensions that resulted in the obliteration of the Roman constitution and members holding consul beyond legal limits. As we can see, instability is often due to the breakdown in the established systems that deal with conflict and grievances, injustices, and inequalities. To build on this, a 2005 paper highlights that a state's instability is hallmarked by an inability of opposing factions to believe that the other faction can act in good faith at all. The problem when it comes to the institutional choices is that there is no such impartial third party that can be trusted to enforce contracts. This is the origin of the commitment problem in politics. In 1981, the Chilean Civil War sparked after a breakdown in official institutions, and the Congress and the President being wholly unable to act in good faith towards one another. They looked for any time, any opportunity to undermine one another, and of course, the Civil War. Thirdly, violence. A realistic start to the war is arguably less important than realistic reasons that people would join a particular side. This is what your characters would do. This is the action in the plot. It's ultimately not just how the Civil War plays out or how it starts on the broader sense, but in that narrow sense, in the scenes, in the story of your characters, what makes them pick a side. Though anyone's reasons can range from strictly ideological to strictly for personal gain, one factor that is commonly missed is proximity to violence. Civilians reacted to indiscriminate violence in their region by colluding with the perpetrator's adversary. This was in the case of the 1936 to 1939 Spanish Civil War, with civilians joining the Republicans, the Afghan Civil War arguably inflating terrorist groups, and the 1955 to 1975 wow, that went on for 2 decades? Vietnam Civil War, with civilians joining the Viet Cong when bombed nearby by the United States. Ask yourself where the violence breaks out in your Civil War, who does it affect, and how does this play into your character's decisions? Part 4. Character motivation, gaining and losing. There are a lot of other factors, but these 3 in particular are interesting when telling the story of your web of characters that gives rise to the important internal Civil War tension that we talked about just before. In considering what your characters have to gain by joining a particular side, think not just about material gain like money or land or status, but their values. In George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, Walder Frey doesn't so much join the Starks initially to gain land and money, he's already pretty filthy rich, but to marry off one of his daughters to the King in the North, and bring House Frey the prestige and influence that he craves. And this question also isn't just about what that character would gain. Would a father fight for one side to ensure that his family is provided for in the case of his death, even if he might disagree with them? Maybe your character's sister is adamant about joining one side, and they do so too because they don't want to fight her, even though they may not agree ideologically. Maybe something that someone else gains is more important to them than what they could gain. However, in the case of the common man, what one might lose is often closely related to simply geography. In Charles Frazier's Cold Mountain, the character of Inman is fighting for the Confederates without choice. The English Civil War wasn't separated into roughly north and south by chance. The average person fighting in those armies could lose their life and livelihood if they refused to fight for the government of that region. Consider where your characters are geographically and whether this will help determine which sides of the war they will fall on. One really interesting thing to do with this gaining or losing question is building a character arc. Some authors use what a character has to lose in a civil war as a means of showing character development. Initially, Ser Jorah is an agent sent by King Robert to spy on Daenerys Targaryen, informing him of her movements and her successes. He does this in hopes of earning a royal pardon and returning from exile to Westeros. But as the story progresses, he joins Dany wholeheartedly, giving up his one chance at being legitimized again and returning home a free man. This is a major point of development for him as a character. Part 5. Communicating instability in the first act. This is most important in a story depicting events leading up to a civil war, like in Max Brooks' World War Z, which tells the story of a zombie plague outbreak and how this leads to civil wars in Israel, China, a bunch of other countries, and almost the United States. What we see is the intense instability that leads up to it. There is a period called the Great Panic after a vaccine is found to be fake. The stock market plummets and people die of hypothermia as they flee into the wilderness. But when writing, one really effective way to communicate these big notions like instability in a state, which is kind of hard to see from our limited perspective, is to use the everyday experiences of a perspective character, particularly in the first act. Is bread suddenly too expensive to buy? Do they suffer a panic attack when they learn that help isn't coming? And what do the children do when teachers don't turn up to school because they haven't been paid by the government? Using a couple of scenes to explore this grounded and personal effect of the instability on your characters will establish a feeling of uncertainty and instability before a civil war more than seeing politicians argue on television ever will. This is also a cornerstone in the tone and atmosphere that you build in your story in the first act. The more basic the struggles in everyday life your characters face, the more desperate the tone of your writing. Following on from this, the type of instability that the characters experience does matter. In Legend of Korra, we see Korra unable to deal with spiritual instability in the Water Tribe prior to the war. It causes chaos. And this motivates her initially to join Unalaq in hopes of bringing harmony to the spirits of the Water Tribe, because that is what he stands for. Whether it's financial problems, religious persecution, fear of law enforcement, or otherwise, the type of instability that we see in the first act of the novel will help determine what your characters A have to gain and B have to lose in deciding their goals and allegiance during the Civil War. Part 6. Violence and character motivation. In considering violence, which events might inspire them to join a side for purely emotional reasons, even if they may not agree 100% ideologically with that faction? We don't necessarily vote for a party that we agree with on every single policy, and there's no reason that that should change during a civil war. It's practically just Parliament, just with a few extra guns and a bit more yelling. Often, the feeling of I and my family are being targeted is a lot stronger a motivation than I kind of agree with this guy. It's a lot easier to fight for your home than it is to fight for an abstract idea. And civil wars are fought in your home. The question is who your characters may feel the perpetrators are, and that may differ depending on each of your characters' experiences. Once again, in A Song of Ice and Fire, House Karstark first felt that they were fighting to protect the North. But after King Robb executes Lord Karstark for treason, while they didn't turn on the Northern cause, they certainly turned their back on the Starks, and the rest of the house abandoned them entirely. However, a character arc that is sometimes used is that a character goes from siding with one faction for emotional reasons, say family, guilt, or misplaced trust, and then they finally find their true philosophical allegiance. Though the story is not a civil war, Zuko did precisely this, going from his allegiance to his family for emotional reasons to joining Team Avatar for philosophical ones.
Once I deliver the Avatar to my father, he will welcome me home with honor.
We've created an era of fear in the world, and if we don't want the world to destroy itself, we need to replace it with an era of peace and kindness.
Do not focus purely on the ideological reasons that come out of the why the war was fought for joining a cause, but the relational, geographic, and emotional reasons that come out of the how the war is fought. Part 7, the tragedy of the setting. There's always been this myth about war, that becoming a soldier means going to foreign lands, seeing new places, finding glory, and returning home a new man. However true this is, it's not. Civil wars have never quite attracted the same glamour, the same tale of adventure. They take place in your homeland. The bombs go off in your city, the blade falls on your people. If not your brother or sister, then the brother or sister of someone you know. In Charles Frazier's Cold Mountain, the American Civil War is shown to be uniquely destructive, in the sense that both sides know that, in the end, whoever wins, the country still lost thousands of lives and would have a shattered national identity. The Union soldiers aren't taking foreign crops like the Germans took French farms, they're taking the livelihoods of their fellow countrymen. A lot of emotional weight can be derived from this, from showing the effects on places that your characters are personally connected with, because the story will be set in their home. This isn't exclusive to Civil War novels. Wars can take place in their home in a normal war novel. Perhaps they find their favourite romantic spot desecrated with bodies. Perhaps they're forced to attack a town that they once lived in. There isn't a foreign land that puts a distance between them and the destruction, and that immediacy can really hurt. And I might leave it there because I'm getting pretty close to delving into not just Civil War, but talking war generally, which is a video in and of itself. So, in summary, firstly, I have a book coming out May 30th on writing and world building, and it has a super pretty cover. Pre-order down below. Secondly, Civil War stories are often better suited to explore national identity than other war stories, because the conflict is internal, from the perspective of the country itself, fought within the country itself by its people. Thirdly, the most important type of tension in a Civil War story tends to be interpersonal conflict rising out of one's allegiance to a friend, family, or country, and picking a side. Fourthly, if you want to base your Civil War in strict realism, lofty ideological motivations tend to be secondary factors in starting a civil war to low-risk, high-return socio-economic political environments. On top of this, a state is usually intensely unstable in the years beforehand. People tend to join a side based on who they feel are the perpetrators of violence against them. Fifthly, consider what characters have to gain and lose in their role in the Civil War, both materially and characteristically. Historically, this has often been determined by mere geography. Some authors use a character's willing choice to lose something for a cause, often status, wealth, or friends, as a hallmark of character development. Sixthly, establish the instability leading up to the Civil War through the everyday experiences of your ordinary characters. Building on this, the type of instability the reader sees, financial, religious, political, or otherwise, will often effectively establish beforehand what a character stands to lose or gain in their role in the Civil War, as well as tone. Seventhly, how violence is perpetrated is often more important than the why or the who does it in determining whether someone will join a cause. It may be more interesting to have a character decide for emotional reasons, something that we actually don't see all that commonly, more than for philosophical ones. Eighthly, a hallmark of the Civil War genre is the emotional weight of the war itself, taking place on home soil instead of foreign soil. Whichever side wins, both sides lose. Consider how the destructive events of your story might play out into the past memories or attachments of your characters. But that's all from me. Thank you to all of my amazing patrons, especially those of you who joined up over the last while. If you want to support the channel, obviously Patreon's there. Thank you so much. Patreon, they all get kind of background stuff on the On Writing book, as well as background stuff on all the videos that I make. I'm always on there on the Discord talking with them. Obviously come follow me on all my social media and so on. I'm trying to get an Instagram started to hashtag connect with the youths. I'm sorry if this video felt a little bit rushed. I've been a bit pressed for time this week. I've had a lot of commitments on, and just managing the book thing, kind of bringing that all out and dealing with all the questions and making sure I'm doing it all right on the timeline schedule. It can just be a bit stressful. But for the moment, I'm probably going to do a few nerdy videos, because I've done a lot of long form, hella hard videos over the last while. I did that deliberately for a particular reason, but I'm gonna probably do one on Azula's psychology next, or within the next couple of videos. Anyways, stay nerdy, come support us at Patreon, all hail Mishka, and I'll see you in the future.